During the State of the Union, there was a lot of discussion about Israel, at least tacit support coming from the Biden administration. But you really heard what he really had to think and what he really had to say when it went to what is called a hot mic moment. And this was after the State of the Union, while he was talking to members of Congress. He made a statement that has gotten a lot of attention out of our team and get a lot of the media as well. And it certainly has gotten the attention of the State of Israel. Take a listen to this.
We got to keep pushing what you're doing on the humanitarian stuff and all this crap. So
I told him, baby, so many people. I said, baby, you know, should come to Jesus. Sir, just
So what he said there was he's talking to members of the Senate, and he said, I've told Bibi he's got to not do this again, not repeat this, and talking about some of the actions that they were taking militarily, and then I said, we're going to have a come to Jesus meeting. To which Bibi Netanyahu responded yesterday on Fox and Friends. It was an interesting response, I think, half tongue-in-cheek, but here we go.
So what does that mean to you, a come to Jesus meeting?
I don't know. I'm not familiar with the term, even though Jesus wasn't born that far away from here. I can tell you that if it means having a heart-to-heart conversation, we've had that plenty of times over the 40 years that I've known Joe Biden.
So I thought it was a good response. Jesus was born about 4.5 miles, 5 miles from where Benjamin Netanyahu was making that statement for his interview. But here's I think the issue that is pressing, and that is obviously Joe Biden, Andy, is starting to really placate the left flank of his party on the Israel issue. And that's not a good sign for Israel. It's not a good sign for stability in the Middle East.
No, it isn't, because by placating the Palestinians, the Arab vote, the vote that he thinks that he's got to have to win this election, he is step by step distancing himself from Israel, because it's inevitable. Israel is fighting an existential war here. A terrible thing happened to Israel in October of last year, and the Israelis are doing all they can to combat that and fighting it. And now the President of the United States is saying, if you enter into Rafah, because that's the way I understood it, you've established a red line, which means a line after which something terrible is going to happen. That can never be the case, Jay.
You know, what's interesting is in defining the red line, he did not say that the Iron Dome, which is Israel's missile defense system, which is given to the Israelis by the United States, technology that's been developed, but also the actual rockets that go up to hit these weapons. He's not saying that will be removed. He's not saying we're going to stop that. So I'm not exactly sure what the red line means. He was asked about that in this interview. Take a listen, number 16.
What is your red line with Prime Minister Netanyahu? Do you have a red line? For instance, would invasion of Rafah, which you have urged him not to do, would that be a red line?
It is a red line, but I'm never going to leave Israel. The defense of Israel is still critical. So there's no red line. I'm going to cut off all weapons so they don't have the Iron Dome to protect them. They don't have. But there's red lines that if he crosses, he cannot have 30,000 more Palestinians dead as a consequence of going after. There's other ways to deal with the trauma caused by Hamas.
You know, the trauma caused by Hamas was an attack on Israel's sovereignty. Not only was it the civilians, 1,200 plus, that were killed, many of which we represent and are going to be representing in other international tribunals. I was on that Zoom call this morning with our colleagues in Israel. But the fact of the matter is Hamas has to be eliminated as a threat. And I don't like the fact that there's been reports that up to 30,000 Palestinians have been killed. Now, that report, of course, is coming in from the Gaza Health Authority, which is, in fact, Hamas. So let's be clear who we're dealing with. But the fact is, telling Israel how to conduct this war, I think, is a very dangerous precedent, Andy.
I think it's a terrible precedent. I don't think the President of the United States has a right to tell Israel in an existential situation how to conduct the war. And I don't think telling the Prime Minister what his policy should be is right. If you read what the President said in response to what Capehart asked him, first he says, and I'm quoting, it is a red line. And then 2 sentences down he says, so there's no red line. Well, is there or isn't there a red line? Are you going to stand with Israel or are you going to not support Israel? Are you going to cut Israel off or are you going to support Israel? The thing is, I think he needs to defer to what the Israelis on the ground are saying and thinking and not make these ridiculous calls back and forth. The figures, Jay, as you pointed out, of dead people are Hamas's figures.
Yes.
So I don't know whether those are true or not. I can't say.
You got to take those with more than a grain of salt. Let's go to Todd in Georgia. Todd, welcome to the broadcast. You're on the air.
I'm curious as how Biden and the State Department don't understand the eschatology of the Iranian regime. Committing murder and mayhem is what they're commanded to do in order to summon their Mahdi, their so-called Messiah. Right. And it seems like that Biden's setting us up, just putting us into a trap.
Well, it's clear that the whole mindset of Hamas and Hezbollah, as well as the Houthis, is that this is their messianic zeal. And I don't call it a messianic zeal within the context of the Judeo-Christian tradition, obviously. It's within the Islamic tradition. And that Islamic tradition is dying for this cause and killing as many civilians, infidels as you can is how you get rewards in heaven. So in that sense, you're totally correct. I think that they're setting up it's a false narrative too, by the way. But if you study the history and you look at where Islam has come from and what we've been dealing with even in the last 25 years in the United States, you're seeing this is not new. You're seeing a replay of Muhammad's own dicta, his own theology, playing out right now in real time in the United States and, of course, certainly in the Middle East.
Well, Jay, this is exactly right. Pope Benedict XVI, who was a brilliant pontiff, a great scholar, Cardinal Ratzinger, delivered an address in Regensburg in Germany when he was Pope, and he made a statement about rational and being rational in your thinking and how do you convert people and how do you bring people over to the side of what is right and what is theistic and what is atheistic. And he said in a discourse, and he was quoting the Emperor Emmanuel Paleologos in the 14th century, and he said, what has Muhammad done that is rational or reasonable in the progress of his religion, and what has he preached? Well, he got tremendous pushback because of this, and tremendous attacks from the Muslims and the Muslim Islamic community because he made a statement about reason and rationale. You cannot deal with reason and rationale when you're dealing with radical Muslims.
Well, here's the issue also that you're dealing with here, and that is Iran is using these proxies. It's the Houthis, it's Hamas, to a lesser extent right now militarily, it's Hezbollah. But folks, that's coming. The Hezbollah North fight. I'm on a Zoom call with our Israeli colleagues every Monday morning at 9 o'clock in the morning, our time. And we go through and I said, what does it look like up north? And they're saying likely some kind of military engagement in April and May that would be significant. So you have that happening simultaneously. And then you mentioned the Iran situation. And who actually wants a deal? Hamas has rejected the proposed ceasefire, in part because I think we're probably down to less than 60 hostages alive, of which they probably don't have control of most of them. But again, going back to the Capehart interview with President Biden, take a listen. This is about who actually wants a deal.
Who actually wants a deal? Do you think Hamas actually wants a ceasefire?
Well, I think Hamas would like a total ceasefire across the board because they would see they have a better chance to survive and maybe rebuild. But that's not what I think the vast majority of people think. You have to look. After what happened in World War II and the carpet bombing that took place, what happened was we ended up in a situation where we changed the rules of the game, our constitutional legitimate rules of war, and they should be abided by.
Well, first of all, that's a totally incorrect statement of international law. What they called carpet, first of all, the Germans were carpet bombing. They were going after civilian targets. The Allies were always going after military targets. But Andy, you're a student of history or a historian. What do you think of that?
Well, I think it's an outrageous statement that he made. He's making the idea that the American military, the Allied military, the entire Allied military that agreed in carpet bombing, which is intensive bombing of the nation, of the oppressor, of the enemy, was now Biden says that he brings this up from carpet bombing. That's not what's happening in Palestine right now, that in Gaza right now. But he says that changes the constitutional legitimate rules of war. Are you saying that carpet bombing now made what we did in World War II unconstitutional through the rules of war and illegitimate? I hope not.
That's what it sounds like. When you start playing with this language of international laws of armed conflict and international engagement, you got to be very careful and you got to be very specific. And Biden is neither, to be quite blunt. Let's go to Mike, who's calling from New Jersey on line 3. Hi, Mike.
The Germans were not hiding in churches, and they weren't hiding in residences, and they weren't hiding in schools. They had uniforms and they had helmets. Yep. Okay, and they also started the war. Okay, Hamas started this war. If they wanted to end it, they could release the hostages.
Number one, Hamas could have accepted the terms of the ceasefire. They did not. In part, I think it's number one, I don't think they know where the hostages are, or at least most of them. Two, they're saying Islamic Jihad, IJP, Islamic Palestinian Jihad, has some of them. Well, they've got control over the area, so this is nonsense. I think the reality is that a lot of these hostages are deceased. I hate to say that because we represent a lot of them, but I'm not optimistic on where it's going. By the way, we're looking at multiple tribunal lawsuits against the United Nations Relief Organization. We've already got FOIA requests out, but we've got plaintiffs that will be filing in the next probably week cases around the country and also in Europe dealing with this situation. So we're on top of it. Let me go ahead and take James' call out of Texas.
I got a question on the floating pier that they want to put in.
Yep.
Isn't that Israeli territorial waters? Wouldn't they need the Israeli government's permission to put it in?
The Israelis have approved it. They said they're certainly willing for the United States, if that's what they want to do to help humanitarian aid, to put the pier in place. In fact, Israel will be providing, according to the president, the necessary security of that. But it does put at least 1,000, maybe 2,000 U.S. soldiers in harm's way. I think, to me, Andy, that is the most critical part of it.
Well, I think it does put them in harm's way. It makes them sitting ducks off the Mediterranean coast of Gaza. You've got a pier, a floating flotilla, whatever it is, and you're going to put American soldiers on there to facilitate the granting of aid from the flotilla to the mainland. Well, of course, those American soldiers are going to be subject to attacks from the mainland. It's inevitable that that's going to happen.
There's something else that's important here, and that is that President Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu, has stated that he has the tacit support of several Arab leaders for driving ahead with the next engagement against Hamas. And I'm guessing that's Egypt and Saudi Arabia at a minimum, maybe Jordan as well. So President Biden's doing a little bit of a head fake when the reality on the ground is Arab neighbors want this threat from Hamas eliminated as well, because the Muslim Brotherhood has tried to take over all of these governments and continues to do so.